I'm Jeff Mays in the New York Times, sitting in for Sam Roberts. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. This week, Nicholas Fandos has been tracking Jack Schlossberg's bid for Congress and what it shows about power and politics in New York. But first, New York is grappling with a lot right now: FIFA subpoenas, Knicks playoffs games, a Park Slope co-op fight in Brooklyn, and big questions about who controls our housing and our streets as summer hits. Claire Fahy has been covering all of it for the New York Times. She joins us now. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's start off with the Park Slope co-op. That was a big issue. They just had a major vote about products from Israel, right? What was the result of that?
Yes, and this vote has been building for about 2 years. They've been pushing for it, the members for Palestine within the co-op, and they succeeded in voting for the boycott 2-1, which was quite a large margin.
What was the argument for boycotting these products in the first place?
The woman I spoke with, Elise Barr, she's 70 years old. She's been a member of the co-op for decades, and she was saying that this is the conscience of the co-op. They've done this before in regards to South Africa, in regards to, Chilean products during Pinochet's dictatorship, things of that nature. They've boycotted Coca-Cola before. So to her, she was saying this was business as usual, and it was very important in her mind that the co-op kind of vote its values and stand up. Whereas the anti-boycott side was kind of saying, at the end of the day, this is a grocery store. Why are we having this discussion necessarily?
Right, and some of the people you spoke to, some rabbis, thought this was a bigger issue about Israel and itself. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Rabbi Rachel Timoner, who is a member of the co-op, was saying that, if the co-op takes this stance, it sends a message to its Jewish members and to, the greater Park Slope neighborhood, the city at large. And she told my colleague Liam Stack that she's actually going to leave the co-op as a result of this vote.
Wow, is that you're going to see? Are we going to see ripples, or does most of the co-op agree with this plan?
Well, the vote margin would suggest that most of the co-op is on board with the boycott, but I do think that if, especially faith leaders like Rabbi Timoner leave, you could see more of that. We'll have to see as the weeks go on.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how this will affect the co-op itself. Now, this has been a big fight for a while, right? And there was a change to voting rules as a result of this. It's such a cultural landmark, the co-op itself. I'm wondering what's the sort of long-term implications of this and some of the changes, some of the issues that came up as a result of this vote.
Yeah, the co-op has devolved into chaos in some ways in the last few weeks as the vote has kind of loomed over them. Just over the weekend, they announced that they would hire greater security for the actual physical grocery store itself. There were some physical altercations outside the grocery store, things of that nature. And so the vibe and the tenor of the co-op has been off in recent weeks, and it'll be interesting to see if they manage to come back together now that the vote has taken place.
I was surprised to see that, this co-op issue came up in a congressional debate, right? Why is a congressional candidates talking about the Park Slope co-op?
Yeah, it is that salient of an issue, and it has in some ways become the talk of the town, especially in Park Slope, of course. So yeah, Dan Goldman came out against the boycott. And of course, Brad Lander said that he wouldn't vote for it, but he wasn't going to necessarily take a stance of how he felt the members should vote. And it revealed that Brad Lander is actually not a member of the Park Slope Co-op, but Representative Goldman is.
I'm wondering what you think this vote says about the strength of the BDS movement in New York City. I mean, New York has the largest population of Jewish people outside of Israel, but also a very large Muslim population. What does this vote say about those two groups and how they interact in the city?
Right, and the BDS involvement is what was a cause for concern for those who were against the boycott, less than even like the nature of the boycott itself, and more of aligning the co-op with this movement that does not necessarily recognize a two-state solution or Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And the Park Slope Co-op, it has 17,000 members, and it's one of, if not the largest co-ops in the country. So it is significant that they are formally aligned with the BDS movement now. All
right, well, we'll move away from tomatoes and such. Let's talk about Knicks tickets. I'm excited that the Knicks are in the finals, but nosebleed tickets are up in the thousands of dollars. Is this normal? Will regular fans be able to see the Knicks finally in the finals?
So there was quite a lot of social media uproar over the Chase presale and some of the other presales on Ticketmaster that went live starting on Tuesday. Now, these aren't the general sale tickets, but there are season ticket holders who are reselling their tickets and things of that nature. And they're eye-popping prices in the thousands of dollars, including for the cheap seats, as they used to be known, up in the nosebleeds. And I spoke to fans who felt that the true fans were maybe getting priced out, and that, if the discussion was $2,000 for a seat, they weren't in that conversation at all.
Now, Madison Square Garden has acknowledged that the ticket prices are high, but they've blamed resellers, right, for boosting the prices even more. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the MSG Sports Group came out pretty strongly yesterday. They own the Knicks, and they were saying, this is a huge issue, but it is not necessarily our fault. It is the fault of these people who are reselling. And like I said, these were mainly resale and pre-sale tickets. They weren't necessarily what we know as face value tickets. Those haven't necessarily gone up yet. So yes, there was a role in terms of people just listing these tickets for kind of insane prices.
I wonder if you think that criticism over the price and whether, actual fans will get to enjoy the Knicks is what led Madison Square Garden to release a couple of hundred tickets to lower income children in the city. They announced that recently.
Yeah, 200 tickets. They announced that last night. And I do think it had a role in it. There was a real question of kind of who's going to be in attendance at these games. And so I think they took some measures to address that for sure.
And it's not just the Knicks. We have a bunch of other sporting events going on in the city. FIFA is going to be in Jersey, and we also have the U.S. Open coming. Ticket prices are an issue in those events as well, right?
Yeah, it's a real broader problem, so much so that actually the New York and New Jersey attorneys general brought a case yesterday that they're investigating, or launched an investigation yesterday, I should say, that into FIFA's ticketing practices and kind of how they're listing their prices. And, there was some talk of whether fans were buying a ticket and then where that ticket seat was located was changing after the fact. So that's already obviously brought the attention from the attorneys general in both those states. And the U.S. Open, once again, pre-sale and resale tickets were going up this week, and they are exorbitant. A grounds pass that I've paid about $70 for in the past was being resold for $350.
Wow. Mayor Mamdani has weighed in, right? He's engineered some sort of deal to get cheaper tickets for FIFA events. What do you think his involvement in this issue as a sort of cost issue for fans says about New York City, about the mayor, and about the administration?
Yeah, he spoke really strongly about this issue on Tuesday night and was saying that, he doesn't want sports to become a luxury commodity, and he wants there to be obviously access. The reason to bring these great events to the city would be to have city residents be able to go. So in the case of the World Cup, the city bought 1,000 tickets at face value, and they're raffling them off kind of in a lottery system for $50 each, obviously a much more manageable price. And he was asked by Pix 11 if he would maybe do that for the NBA Finals. And he said he couldn't make a promise. He didn't know if he could keep, but he'd look into it.
So there's a possibility he could be talking to James Dolan right now.
There could be, yes, indeed.
Trying to get some cheap tickets. Send me one. I need one. Anyway, let's stay on Mayor Mamdani. You recently wrote in the newsletter about a story I worked on about his agenda for housing, and specifically public housing residents. And so he sort of campaigned on the idea of freezing the rent, but I'm wondering, has he been as studious in addressing the issues of the city's crumbling public housing stock?
Yeah, and I think the residents of that public housing stock didn't feel that he had mentioned it as strongly or attacked it in the way that they needed. There are about 300,000 residents of public housing. There's about 170,000 units, and they need $80 billion in repair. So on Tuesday, Mayor Mamdani announced $5.6 billion in trying to address that problem. Obviously, that's a smaller number than maybe what we needed.
Yeah, that's a massive gap. What is the hope for sort of finding any of these other billions of dollars that are needed to repair public housing? Yeah,
it's definitely an issue that most recent mayors have faced and attempted to tackle with limited success, obviously, as it continues to be an issue. I think the interesting move that Mayor Mamdani made this week is he is going to partner more with private sector to get that money flowing towards repairs and things of that nature that those housing units need. And that was a little bit of a surprise, just given how strongly he's spoken out about not partnering with the private sector.
But there was concern raised by NYCHA residents about the sort of the city targeting or joining with these private developers, right? What are their concerns with these private developers being involved?
Yeah, some people felt that they wouldn't address the actual problems, and that, you know, there was talk of they don't need more kind of red tape and bureaucracy, they just need these apartments fixed. I know Emma Fitzsimmons, our colleague, was up in the Bronx, and people were coming to her just openly and saying, you know, there's mold issues, there's heat issues, the elevators don't work, and in these high-rise buildings, elevators have to work. And so, yes, there's a concern that what actually needs to be addressed won't be addressed.
Great. Thank you, Claire. You're an intrepid general assignment reporter for the Times. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Nick Fandos takes us inside Jack Schlossberg's chaotic congressional campaign. Nicholas Fandos covers New York politics and government for the New York Times, and this month he's been reporting on Jack Schlossberg's run for Congress and what that race says about power and ambition in the city right now. He joins us to explain what he's learned and where this race fits into New York's bigger political story. Nick, thanks for coming in.
Good to be here, Jeff.
Yeah, so this Schlossberg story, I loved it. It was so fascinating. For our viewers who didn't see it, tell us a little bit about what you uncovered about Schlossberg's campaign.
Yeah, so I've been covering a pretty active primary season here in New York for a bunch of House races, and none of them has gotten more attention than a fight to succeed Jerry Nadler in Manhattan. There's a bunch of candidates that got into that race. It's a safely Democratic seat. It's kind of a crown jewel district. You know, it's got more Fortune 500 companies than anywhere in the world, a bunch of loyal Democrats, media empires, et cetera. So there's always going to be interest in this race. But when Jack Schlossberg, the only grandson of John F. Kennedy, decided to get into the race to try and revive the Camelot political dynasty, as it were, he became a huge kind of focus, international news in a way that you wouldn't expect from a congressional candidate typically. Schlossberg is kind of best known as a social media provocateur. If you're on TikTok or Instagram, you've probably encountered his videos. Some of them are very serious. He's going after his cousin, RFK Jr. Some of them, he's dancing with his shirt off or musing about things that you can't quite tell, is it a joke or is it not? Right. And so I think there was a question right away when he got into the race. Is this a serious guy? Could he be a serious representative of this district? And, you know, will the compelling things about him, his family history, his youth, his kind of energy, could that be something that Democrats in this district would be into at a time when they're trying to make their party younger, trying to figure out a path forward in the Trump era? So I set out to try and figure out who is this guy and what does his campaign look like? That's ultimately what the story was around. And I found some pretty interesting, stuff.
Let's talk about that a little bit because, you know, it seems there are some issues with the campaign. There's been high staff turnover, and some are questioning his seriousness. You had one great anecdote where he was kicking off the campaign. His team wanted him to go do fundraising, but he told them he needed a nap.
Yeah.
He disappeared for the rest of the day. What do those things say about what type of
That's right. So often when we're vetting candidates for political office, as journalists and as voters, like we're looking at their background, like what work have they done? You know, if they were in a previous lower office, how did they vote? How did they comport themselves? If they had a business career? Schlossberg, given his age and given his kind of wealth and social status, does not have a long, kind of deep professional career to look at. So looking at his campaign, I thought might be a good proxy to understand, like, how does he run things? How does he comport himself? And I had started to hear these funny stories that, like, maybe he was as chaotic behind the scenes in his own operation as he is online. And so you reference one of those stories. I think it's indicative because it was literally the first day of his campaign. He chose to run. He chose the launch day for the campaign. And when you launch a campaign, you have all these big plans to kind of show the world that you're serious. You want to raise money. You want to do media interviews. You often have a video, things like that. For Schlossberg, it was extra important to show, like, I'm a serious guy. I can stand on my own 2 feet. And the middle of that first morning, he basically phones in and says, "I need to take a nap."
Right.
Which has been a line that got some pickup. But I think more important is that he basically checked out and was offline the rest of the day and left his team scrambling to try and pick up the pieces. And my understanding is that things like this happened with some frequency early in the campaign. You referenced, yes, he's had an unusually high level of staff turnover. But it's not just the turnover, it's sometimes the way he's gone about it, kind of hiring and firing people within very short periods of time. In some cases, never really telling them they were fired. And so weeks would go by until they kind of dawned on the fact that he had essentially ghosted, some of these folks. And I think that, campaigns are always messy, right? These are not professional, not known to be super professionalized operations. But the kind of things that I'm heard and then reported kind of go beyond what is typical, and I think offered a window into kind of how he's running things and how he might operate if he's elected as a congressman.
I saw one of his responses to the article, and it was, it was a jokey social media video with him taking a nap, and so I mean, what do you think that says about the state of sort of political play? Is this just the future? Are we going to have young candidates who are video oriented, just sort of using this to their advantage?
Yeah, well, I want to say he's had kind of two different, pretty disparate responses. One of them, he and his campaign have invoked the death of his sister, which Tatiana Schlossberg, who died during this campaign, and it's a real tragedy. And I think a lot of people have empathy
Absolutely.
for him and for their family. And so he's pointed to that and said, in some cases, when I was not present or I needed to check out, that was why. I think people can evaluate that as they will. It seems like a reasonable thing. On the other hand, he's kind of treated the whole thing as something of a joke. As you say, he posted a picture right after the story came out of himself kind of asleep on a table.
Right.
And said, I just had a good night's sleep, but I've decided to take a nap. Clearly he was trying to kind of poke fun at the New York Times and the whole idea of it. Whether that will reassure people or not, I don't know. He has also said, yes, this is an unusual campaign, but it's because I'm an unusual candidate, and I'm not interested in doing the same thing Democrats have been doing, led by consultants, the consultant class forever. That's not worked for us. So he's had kind of a variety of responses. I think voters will need to evaluate them on their own. And the interesting thing about this district in Manhattan is it is actually the most highly educated congressional district in the country. It's also one with a really tight-knit civic culture, and so I think people are going to be paying attention to him and all the other candidates we can talk about in really deep detail.
Yeah, I mean, Nadler chose someone as a successor, Micah Lasher, right? And what has Micah had to say about Schlossberg? How is he approaching the
Yeah, Micah is a longtime kind of high-level staffer in New York politics who became an assemblyman. He is, in a lot of ways, in the Nadler mold. He's not terribly charismatic. He's not a barn burner out there giving speeches. He's certainly not a social media savant as Schlossberg is, but he's got real policy chops. And so they have, as you can imagine from that description, really kind of butted heads over the course of this campaign over kind of tactics and style. And I think Schlossberg's argument is basically this guy doesn't have what it takes in the Trump era, and I do. And Lasher's response has essentially been this guy's not serious. This is a serious district. This is a serious moment for the country. Is he really up for the job?
Yeah, I guess the question would be, he's part of the Kennedy family, obviously, and we know that name, and it carries great political weight in this country. So is that the main crux of his campaign? How much of his sort of popularity is based on the idea that he's part of this legendary political family?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think certainly we can say that if his family name was not Kennedy, he would not have entered this race and been able to put together a couple $1 million very quickly. He would not have gotten the international kind of wall-to-wall news coverage that he did and tabloid coverage that he has. It's hard to know exactly, but I think that is undoubtedly a big part of where he's at. And, I think there's a debate right now among the electorate of can he stand on his own 2 feet, or is he just drafting on the family name? And, do we want more do the voters want more Kennedys? This is a moment where Democrats, I think, are thinking a lot about what their party should look like and trying to turn the page on certain things, where they're trying to distinguish themselves from Donald Trump. We've had no Kings rallies and kind of anti-monarchical energy on the left. Like, how does that comport with the Kennedy family dynasty? And I'm really fascinated to see how all that will be sorted out by the voters.
And last question on this, and we'll move on. How has the political establishment responded? How have party leaders, how have union leaders responded to this sort of question that you're addressing here?
I think that by and large they've shown a lot of deference for him. So Schlossberg, despite his family history, is trying to kind of run as an outsider. And in some ways he is outside of the New York political milieu and establishment. He didn't come up through local office. But on the other hand, as I was reporting this piece even and in the aftermath, I was really struck by the incredible amount of kind of deference and reverence and respect for his family. And frankly, I think a fear by a lot of people, whether they're in unions or in democratic politics, to speak on the record and openly their true thoughts about their encounters with him, because they don't want to either cross his family, or in some cases, I think they feel sympathy for his family, which has gone through a profound amount of tragedy.
Right. This race is not the only interesting race happening. There's a couple of other contests going on. You have Claire Valdez versus the Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynoso, out in Brooklyn. Alex Boris is also running. Tell me about the three races you think are.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating election season. We're seeing a lot more primary activity in New York congressional races than we normally would. Some of that is because of retirements. Nadler, as we mentioned, retired. Nydia Velasquez, a longtime trailblazing congresswoman from Brooklyn, is also retiring, opening up another safe Democratic seat. But I'm kind of viewing these races in a lot of ways as a continuation of last year's mayoral race. It's like unfinished business for both sides. I think the kind of more established mainstream of the Democratic Party is once again up against the kind of left progressive movement that helped elect Mayor Mamdani, and they're clashing in races all over the city. Right. Those mainstreamers would like to hold their line. The mayor and his coalition are really pushing right now to expand their power. They feel like he's got strong approval ratings. There's a lot of antipathy towards the president that's leading Democrats to be open to things they might not typically. So yeah, in race after race, we're seeing kind of clash after clash. I can walk through each of them if you'd like.
Yeah, with the Valdez and Reynoso race, I mean, they're both very progressive candidates, right? They both sort of align with some of the vision of Mayor Mamdani, right? So that seems like an interesting race, intra-party battle that's happening.
Yeah, so that's the race to succeed Congresswoman Velasquez. It's in a really interesting district it's like about a third Latino, but it's gentrified like crazy over the last 20 years. This is the district that has Williamsburg in it, that has Greenpoint, that has Bushwick, these kind of international emblems of gentrification, and with them have come kind of a much younger, college-educated voting class. And so what's interesting about it is it's not one of these fights which we're used to in New York between progressives and moderates. It's a fight between a progressive and a socialist, so kind of left versus lefter. Both of the candidates, as you mentioned, support Mamdani and most of his agenda. And so it's really kind of broken into tribal politics. Reynoso kind of came up through the system. He has the support of Velasquez, the labor unions, the kind of older Latino community groups in the district. Valdez, moved to the district more recently. She has the support of DSA and of the mayor and of a lot of these younger voters that were really a key part of his coalition last year. And I think the question is like, which of those groups gets to decide what the left looks like and which of them is going to show up in greater numbers?
There's a couple other interesting congressional races. You have Brad Lander versus the incumbent Dan Goldman. Polls show that Lander has a big lead over him in that race. And then you have Adriano Espaillat in Upper Manhattan, who, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who stands to be chair of appropriations or
maybe a appropriations subcommittee.
Something like that. He stands to gain some significant power if Democrats win back the House.
That's right.
Tell me about those two races.
So here you have two incumbents who maybe in a more traditional electoral environment would be fine, but after Mamdani's victory, I think the left is feeling really emboldened. And so they're taking shots at both of these guys. I think Goldman is in a lot worse shape, in part because his challenger, Brad Lander, is so well known. You'll remember, Lander ran for mayor last year. He's very close with Mamdani, but he's kind of been a fixture in Brooklyn politics for 20, 25 years now. Goldman had been a federal prosecutor and has only been in office a few years. And they are both, relatively left, but they have a pretty big difference in how they have viewed Israel and the war in Gaza and the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. And basically, Lander has been able to take all of those things, plus his history in the district, his alliance with Mamdani, and put together a lead that looks pretty impressive right now, even though Dan Goldman has these real kind of anti-Trump bona fides. Right. The race up, in Upper Manhattan in the Bronx is one that I think is a little bit harder to know where it's going. It seems to be getting more competitive here at the end. Espaillat is the first Dominican member of Congress. He runs a kind of like local political machine there. But he also has some liability around taking support from AIPAC and his positions on foreign policy. He eventually endorsed Mayor Mamdani, but only after the primary last year. And he's being challenged by another kind of young DSA upstart whose campaign has a lot of energy. She's trying to tap into changes in that district. I think the big question there is whether the mayor gets involved. Obviously, Espaillat did him a big solid when he endorsed him last year after the primary.
First congressman to do so, right? Or one of the earlier.
One of the first Cuomo supporters to flip in any case. Will the mayor return that and cross the DSA, his ideological allies, and home? Will he side with them? Will he stay on the sidelines? Given his kind of electoral force right now, I think the answer to that question could help determine who ends up winning that race.
Just tell us quickly, what does Mayor Mamdani have to gain, and what does he have to lose? He's poked his nose in a couple of these races, and it seems like some of them might be a bit of a gamble. More
than poked his nose. I mean, he's been more active in these kind of high-level races than I think we've seen from a mayor in a long time. And if it works out, if his candidates all win, what he's going to end up with is both allies, more allies in Congress who can help kind of bring things back to New York City, but maybe more importantly, I think an added position of strength, that his movement is bigger than just him. He may be a leader of it, but that there is real kind of strength and currency across the city in democratic socialism and in left politics. If he loses, having made such an investment of his capital, I think it could be pretty damaging to him politically for some of the same reasons. I think it might show that his victory, maybe we start looking at it more as kind of about him and a one-of-one, and not a transferable thing onto others. It's not so much the ideology or the socialist label, but the specific campaign he ran. So that seems to be some of what we'll find out with the results.
Great. Well, Nick, hopefully you can come back after some of these races are over, and we'll do an autopsy on what happened. So thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here.
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Jeff.
That's it for our show. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Jeff Mays. If you've enjoyed these conversations and want to support more programs like this, please consider donating at the link on your screen. Thank you for watching.